The last video was a thumbnail version of arriving at the contemporary neoliberal situation. Remember, anything you see and listen to here needs much further examination to really understand what's happening. The idea is to open up the conversation and to explore the topics mentioned with an emphasis on replacing bad ideas with good ones. This is particularly important for the younger generation who have little or no experience in the history we will examine here, or before neoliberalism, or before Thatcher if you like, but also should serve as a reminder for everyone else. So let's get started. Understanding Power 2, the parasite. Capitalism is not a success, it's not intelligent, it's not beautiful, it's not just, it's not virtuous, and it doesn't deliver the goods. In short, we dislike it and we're beginning to despise it. But when we wonder what to put in its place, we are extremely perplexed. That was John Maynard Keynes, born in 1883. What we are experiencing today is not capitalism in a traditional sense. It is neoliberalism, which is much worse than capitalism. Neoliberalism is a parasite. Its only interest is in feeding itself and nothing else. It can really only be understood using these kind of analogies, as its functions are too abstract to follow. Michael Hudson, author of Junk Economics, explains the neoliberal parasite thus. The key is how a parasite takes over a host. It has enzymes that numb the host's nervous system and brain. So when it stings or gets its claws into the host, there's a soporific anaesthetic to block it from realising that it's been taken over. The parasite then sends enzymes into the host's brain to control its behaviour. The parasite cannot take anything from the host unless it takes over the brain. The brain in modern economics is the government, the education system, and the way that society makes economic policy for how to behave. In nature, the parasite makes the host think that the free rider, the parasite, is its baby, part of its body. Its aim is to convince the host to protect the parasite over itself. That's how the financial sector has taken over the economy. That's why we save banks rather than saving the economy. We are saving the parasite rather than our own interests. The neoliberal bread and circuses, the distractions, propaganda, consumption that mortgage us to the banks are part of the parasite's enzymes that work to numb us. The reason for much of our perplexity is because we have lived under the control of the parasite for so long and spend most of our time in protecting and enhancing its interests. We have little time for anything else, particularly our own interests. And this will continue until we get the parasite off our back. Because if it is given free will, it's going to feed in anything and everything we produce. What the neoliberal parasite does not understand, nor is the least bit interested in, unlike traditional capitalism, is putting some of its profits back in to develop some kind of social structure, some relief mechanism, at least to disguise wealth disparity, like public amenities, parks and institutions and so on. The neoliberal parasite is oblivious to these subtleties. How long we stand back uninvolved while the parasite hollows out what is left of our democracy will determine how much we need to do to replace it. Self-determination. If we are to progress anywhere towards replacing capitalism or undoing neoliberalism, it is important that we work to replace the institutions that have been destroyed that allows neoliberalism to function unfettered. There is a need to create or recreate some principles or building blocks in which to set future goals, as well as relate to things already happening. Foundations are important, as a biblical fable drummed into us when we were kids about what happened when we build our house on the sand. But these foundations, as well as being solid, need also to be meaningful, understandable and agreeable to most people if they are to sustain our struggle, such as the few suggestions we will talk about further on, like subsistence, shelter, education and agency. Why do we need them? People are confused, understandably. That is all part of the neoliberal strategy to create confusion through precariousness, fear of foreigners, the poor, isolation, insecurity, doubt and fear of the future. Folk have nowhere to or very little to turn to for information, for reassurance, for social companionship. These institutions have been destroyed and replaced by junk news, dehumanisation of resources and the abstractions of the internet. We didn't agree to any of these things. These things are just made up as they go along. Nobody understands them, even those who make them up. It's not designed to be understood, but to have the complete opposite effect, to baffle, confuse and completely jam the thought process. You could never keep up with it, and if you try, you will have little or no time for anything else, which is exactly the purpose of the subterfuge in the first place, to nullify the brain of the host. So, how do we fight it? We probably need to start again and look at some founding basic principles that will guide our efforts through the quagmire of neoliberal junk that works to obliterate any such ideas. So as I already mentioned, what could these be? Subsistence, the means of supporting oneself, shelter, a reasonable rent and a place to live, sleep and feel safe, learning from and teaching each other about dreams and aspirations, and agency, the freedom to think and do for oneself. These may seem simple and obvious, for they are. Could they be the basis in which to build self-determined communities? Why self-determined communities? Self-determination is anathema to the destroyers of fundamental democracy for many reasons. If we look at some of them, for a start, the above ideas have done and could again help to form a solid social base in which to work from. They could also help to form a fundamental basis for critical thought towards thinking about what we really need to know and learn, rather than what we are encouraged to believe, which is actually harmful to us. We need the security of a sound social base, which these things could help to form. We need to be free from personal basic worries before we can effectively tackle the bigger global issues that are threatening ourselves and the planet. That doesn't mean we need to stop thinking about one thing while concentrating on another. But how can we, for instance, encourage an interest in global warming when so many minds are occupied in domestic and financial day-to-day struggles and feeding the parasite as well as trying to survive? These issues need to be looked at together as they are two sides of the same coin to create a critical mass which will be needed to change anything. We also need to create the critical connections that will help to build that mass. At this present juncture in the clock of the world, avoiding these things in order to spend our time speaking truth to power, protesting and what we like doing could be suicidal. Because there's a true cost to everything, and everything has its own value. What our neoliberal masters leave out is there can be pleasure in thought, in self-worth, in sacrifice, in creativity, in learning, in teaching, in sharing, and communion with others. Many of these cultural values have been reduced to cost. Walk through any large city centre, what do you find? hundreds of shops selling the same things you either have to eat or wear. There is little else apart maybe from what you need to plug into a wall socket. The value we are being encouraged to believe becomes not the practicality of our purchase, but the price status it brings to the wearer. We are educated to be proud of such purchasing power, of our widescreen TVs, clothes, motor cars as rewards for our slavery. The wizards of junk economics will revel in this, and the same elites will complain at every reference that is made to valuable and important services provided by our taxes, like hospitals, education, social housing. These will be rendered as not value, but cost, and their urgent need to be privatised. The only incentive we are offered by neoliberalism is to be upwardly mobile. We need to leave behind values, principles, aspirations, and dedicate our lives only to the struggle for survival in the market economy. Or we need to compile a compelling story of our own to replace neoliberalism. The next part of the project will be about how do we go about compiling a compelling story. We cannot convince people through rational means, even when they're aware of what's happening. When rich elites are taking millions out of our economy, while our infrastructure is crumbling, where kids are living in poverty, while so many are homeless, while corporate criminals go free and banks are protected and rescued no matter what they do. How does this happen? How is this done to us? It is done by them creating a story about us, about our criminalisation, about why we need protected, about why we can't run our own communities, why we can't communicate, why our resources need privatised, why we can't have enough schools, why we need to live in fear, why we have to live in the poverty of imagination. That is their story, and it claims all of our resources as they tell it, and it will not be given up easily. What they have been given so freely will not be given up easily. We need to create our own story to replace their story, but we need to change the narrative. We can't speak within their story. We need to create a compelling story about being responsible and accountable, about working to build the kind of communities we want, about working towards a decent society. But our story needs some kind of participatory storyboard at the grassroots, aimed at getting folk active in public life. A story that needs to cut through not only the narrative of endless propaganda and the capitalist default model, but it needs to break through the weariness of people's lives, a shock to our system, a realisation of what can be achieved with at first easy, achievable aims, a story of the rebuilding of working class culture, institutions and determination. Our story will also need to be, in the prevailing terminology, robust, sustainable and recycled, referring to our history, traditional values and past achievements and failures, and in the spirit of reawakening the radical imagination.